I actually want to start off by reading what the ANC Manifesto says about the ANC. I think it's worthwhile quoting directly. It says, the hardships and suffering of many has led them to believe that the ANC leaders care only about themselves, that we are soft on corruption, and we do not care about the suffering of ordinary people. We admit we have made mistakes as the ANC, with some members and leaders undermining institutions of the democratic states and advancing selfish personal interests. It goes on to say that the ANC is the living embodiment of renewal, and its members will show exemplary conduct in society by upholding the core values and principles of selfless public service, discipline, and integrity. What's your view on that, Ramon?
It's probably going to work this time. The drunk uncle is not going to go fiddle with children and get drunk on weekends. We can trust him this time around. But that's what the ANC always says. They said this 5 years ago. They said this under Jacob Zuma. They said this under Thabo Mbeki. They said every 5 years. So the things that people think they are is the truth. What the ANC says about itself is always the lie.
Yeah, but I also think it's very interesting that the ANC actually seems to understand very well what the problem with the ANC is. I mean, they've quoted it verbatim. We do think that they only look after themselves because they do. Anyway, let's actually just go on to 10 key points out of the manifesto. It's a 44-page long manifesto, guys. So we're just going to take a couple of the points here. Let's start off with the most important one, the one that everybody knows the ANC loves to talk about, and that is expropriation without compensation. The actual manifesto this time doesn't say a lot on it. In fact, the only real kind of line to it says that the ANC will have more effective use in the provisions of the Constitution and expropriation legislation to accelerate land reform. The land reform's still on the agenda, and the kind of constitutional change is alluded to, but it's not a key manifesto point anymore. What's your view on that, Ramon?
Let us not forget, EWC, they wanted to change the definition of the Constitution, right? And they failed to do that. So now what they have is the expropriation bill. And a lot of the academics at the time of EWC said, you don't need to change Section 25 of the Constitution. It allows for EWC anyway. So I think they've taken on board all those white liberals at the time, and it was saying, you don't need to change the Constitution, guys. Just take the whitey's land anyway, because it's, perfectly fine under Section 25. And I think that is exactly what they're going to do under the expropriation bill, as we've said on this channel about 1,000 times by now.
Yeah. So let's go on to number 2. The second one is they're going to create 3.5 public sector job opportunities. Now, the word opportunities is important. They don't say full-time employment. They also said they're going to create a national youth service with the SADF and to prioritize food security. Now, I'm not sure how that all goes together in the same sentence, but it does. What do you think of that?
So this is like the extended public works program. So the minimum wage is like 30 Rand an hour. The government's allowed to pay you 12 Rand an hour under this extended public works thing, right? Because, if you don't pay minimum wage in the private sector, you go to jail. But if you're the government, you're allowed to give you half of the minimum wage for some reason. So it looks like they're just going to employ more people, spend more of our tax money on the poor and the ugly so they can get grants and get 11 Rand an hour to do something. I'm not too sure exactly what, because we're not building anything. We're not building infrastructure. We're not building like great refineries or power stations. So I'm not too sure what these people will be doing with their lives. Maybe they'll just join the SNDF for a youth program, basically stealing what the DA said in 2019 and what the PAs is saying currently in terms of, if you can't employ them, just send them to the army. I suppose that's better than giving them a grant. Essentially, the ANC has run out of ideas on how to create employment for people. So they're just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that they talk about food security, specifically food security. When they reference it, it's actually talking about, people being able to buy food. So the ANC has this covered. What they say is they're going to do a VAT exemption on essential items and support for the community and home gardens. They have loved this home garden thing now. It's all the rage. They're talking about basically growing these small farms on your little, backyard. And they say they're going to act against price fixing because if you recall, all white monopoly and all the big corporations must be price fixing because that's the only reason food goes up, right? It's just greedy capitalism. So the ANC says that that's how they're going to promote food security in the house.
Again, an idea stolen from the DA. The DA has been going on about having VAT exempted food for poor people. I think, more VAT should be added to more food so poor people can pay their fair share of tax. But that's just my line of thinking. And yeah, home gardens, they just want the Karen vote. Karen loves their organic heirloom, tomatoes made from the compost of their toilet. So yeah, like kudos to them. Very good. That will solve food security in this country.
Yeah. So the next one is they're going to strengthen income support through the existing social grants and the use of the social distress of relief grants. As they've always said, it's nothing so permanent as a temporary measure. Remember, the temporary social distress of relief grants was granted during COVID to help alleviate people with their lockdowns. Well, as we've all seen, this appears to be phasing in towards a basic income support grant. ANC's words, not mine. So they want that to be the foundation, and the ANC are committing, and they did this in the budget as well, to somehow increasing that 315 to basically a living wage.
I think I don't know, I'm not sure if it's a living wage, but it goes to show that the National Democratic Revolution has run out of ideas on how to create employment for people. So back in the old days, the way the Afrikaners did was they built these institutions like Eskom and Transcorp and whatever else, with the Arms Corps at the time. And a lot of the poor Afrikaner whites used to work for these institutions. They weren't there to make money. They weren't there to be corrupt. They weren't there to enrich the political leaders. These institutions were created to build a foundation for South Africa so that trade could happen and people could become wealthier. For the ANC, it is exactly the opposite. All these institutions are created for their thievery, their selfishness. And then they're going to give them over to cadres as well, who are already connected and rich, but they want to just make them even richer. So you can see the difference in terms of thinking. The ones created many jobs for many whites at the time. The other is not creating that many jobs for blacks.
But number 5 is actually quite an important one. It's to route the electricity grid. So the ANC is they're going to invest in the transmission grid. The grid point is very important because it doesn't mean the actual creation or production of it. They're talking about the transmission. As you know, Eskom wants to break up into points. And they're saying that they want to have more input from renewable sources. We've all know about the ANC asking the private sector to supply it through the Independent Power Producer Agreement. They want to install solar water heaters. It's very interesting that they use that phrase specifically, not solar generation for the house, but water heaters. I mean, we've seen those all in the RDP houses everywhere. They love to install them. And they want to develop gas, nuclear, and hydropower projects. And this, according to them, will solve the energy problem in South Africa through the transmission grid, not through the production of electricity.
Like the ANC don't know how to create jobs. They don't know how to produce electricity anymore either. Even though it's very simple, like just fix the coal power stations and then you'll have more electricity than ever before. So here they're just relying on the private sector and creating solar geysers for RDP houses, I suppose, to alleviate something or other. Nuclear is interesting. I wish they went full on nuclear like Jacob Zuma did back in 2016 until they got scuppered by the West. But yeah, the ANC don't know how to create jobs and they don't know how to produce electricity, which is quite evident in this manifesto.
Yeah, what they also don't know how to do is solve crime. So point 6 and 7, I'm going to combine those two because they're actually connected. The first, as I said, they're going to improve lives by combating drugs, organized crime, extortion, and gangsterism. So the ANC, basically, they're going to improve people's lives by taking action against the ANC. The seventh point is actually they provide some details, and they basically say they're going to modernize the policing service whilst having Becky Selle there. That's funny. Increase the number of frontline officers. Presumably, they're going to reduce the number of, the whole private security sector, the bodyguards for the MPs, maybe. And they're going to strengthen the justice system, and they're going to strengthen the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA. And how they're going to do that is they're going to reduce case backloads. Presumably, loads are just going to disappear in a random fire. So they say that doing that's going to obviously solve crime in the state. Not sure I buy that, but that's what they say.
Yeah, to modernize the police service. I don't know. Maybe the police service will have a panic button. They go straight to ADT when they get robbed of their fire weapons and service weapons. Yeah, You can write words on paper, but it rings so hollow when you see what is actually going on in this country. They have no intention whatsoever of creating a country at all. They're quite happy to see it sink as long as they can, create grift from it.
Glad you talked about creating a country because obviously points 8 and 9, again connected, actually are quite important, and it's actually around the immigration issue. I don't know if you know this, Ramon, but there's actually a phrase around immigration in the Bible. It's actually in Deuteronomy. And the actual phrase is in Deuteronomy 28 and verse 43. And it says, when foreigners live in your land, they'll gain more and more power while you gradually lose yours. They will have money to lend you, but you will have none to lend them. In the end, they will be your rulers. And I suppose to a large degree, we've seen that with Zimbabwe, haven't we? I mean, we've seen them all come over here, take jobs, and then lo and behold, who's the biggest Twitterati on political matters? Well, we've covered this before, Morning Shot. It's the Zimbabwean political analyst who isn't actually from here. Anyway, the actual ANC Manifesto has this covered for you. And what they say is that they're going to reform the ANC. The ANC is going to reform the immigration issue. And how they're going to do this is that they're basically going to overhaul the immigration system. And they're going to introduce a unified citizen, refugee, and migration law. And then point 9 is that they're going to give preference to South African job seekers and act against employment and exploitation of undocumented persons. In other words, they're going to go after all the people that have some gardener who works for them from Malawi, basically. They're going to act against those individuals to make sure that you only employ the local South African. What do you think of that?
Again, sounds good, but how about like just building a wall, or like maybe having a border first before we do any overhauling of like theoretical visas? I think it would make far more sense if we know where South Africa is, where it starts, especially on our northern border, to see, okay, this is where it starts. Now let's secure it so no more people can come over, and then we can figure out what the hell is going on in South Africa itself. But overhauling like the paperwork, yeah, seemed like just busy work for no reason, which in essence is ANC rule since 1994.
Yeah, and I suppose the last point 10, is actually the one that matters the most to most individuals. And you see, the ANC actually seems to understand this. And they have a whole section dedicated to potholes. Yeah, genuine. They have a whole section dedicated to potholes. It says the ANC will use the public employment programs to fix potholes and pave roads and will create a bigger role for the South African National Roads Agency. And they're going to fix all the potholes because they know that in many parts of the country, there aren't roads. The roads have actually completely disintegrated and they've gone to nothing. I mean, we saw this when we drove through the Northern Cape. The roads virtually were non-existent. I mean, that road to Aranya is just like, it just don't exist. If you're not driving a tank, which we weren't, yeah, your car isn't going to thank you, and mine didn't. But it's interesting that they understand, probably more so in the Western Cape, that potholes are a big issue, and they should probably fix them.
But I mean, national elections don't come around very often. They come around every 5 years. You have 5 years to draft your manifesto. You have 5 years to tell the world what you want to do when you gain power. And I think this manifesto exemplifies how lost the ANC is. I just see a lack of a will to live. But this country is so retarded that people will just vote for them anyway. And there's also the question of the opposition being rather shit at what they do. But if this is the 5 years, is this the culmination of 5 years' work into a document? It's really pathetic. Like proper pathetic. Yet they're going to get 50% of the vote, maybe, or 52% of the vote, even. And that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, what you do find in the ANC's manifesto is as much of the muchness of what you've had in the past. You've seen the same promises over and over again, and the ANC have basically run out of ideas because there's certain things that ANC feels it has to have. There are references in the ANC's manifesto to, as an example, prescribed assets. I mean, we've seen prescribed assets many, many times as an ANC policy. They promised the NHI in 5 years. They don't know how, but they're promising that. I mean, there's always the fictitious promise of jobs. They're just getting magic jobs from somewhere, as if because they say it's somehow going to happen. A lot of what the ANC kind of says in this manifesto, to be frank, Ramon, I think we've seen many, many times before. The ANC have talked the same game many, many times before. Yeah, we are. 2024, unemployment's never been higher, our credit rating's never been worse. Most people don't want to invest in the country. They deem it to be uninvestable. So, obviously, in typical communist fashion, Ramon, when in doubt, do what you did before, just do it harder.
Exactly. And if you run out of ideas, just steal the ideas of other opposition parties and pass them off as your own. This is not a manifesto of a party that wants to save South Africa. It's not a party in reform. It's not a party that gives a shit. It's a party that's dying. And the exemplary policies in its manifesto are more than enough evidence of that. Maybe, Byron, the solution, therefore, is for the ANC to get 50% in this election, rule, in quotes, for another 5 years, and let it die. Let it shoot it in the head come 2029. Do you think that your water sources are safe? Because in Gauteng in particular, the water situation is becoming increasingly dire. With declining water supply and questionable quality, your health could be at risk. But there is a simple solution. A certified laboratory water test from H2O Guru can ensure that the water from your borehole, tap, or other sources is safe to drink. H2O Guru offers turnkey solutions to transform your water into safe, high-quality drinking water. So whether you wish to put a borehole in your property, or you already have a borehole in your property, or you just want to test the municipal water, why not give H2O Guru a call?